100,000 years ago, there were people who stayed by the campfire and people who wandered. I'm pretty sure I'm a direct descendant of the wandering type. It's just who I am.
Welcome, wanderers. I'm Dean. I'll be your guide as we trek through the world of Jack Reacher. Where Reacher says nothing, I'll put in my 2 cents. My biggest focus will be on the show. Now, I've read the books and watched the movies. Where it comes into play, I'll talk about those pieces, but my eye will be focused mainly on the show Reacher. Now, I'd like to introduce to you my co-host, non-silent partner and compass for our ongoing journey, my wife, Tiara. Hi, Tiara.
Hello, I'm Tiara. I love the TV show, but I'm a voracious reader, and I'm going to focus more on the differences and updates from the books. I'll talk about the changes that are really good and others that are maybe not so great, but it will all be from love for the genre, books, movies, and now the TV series.
All right. If you haven't heard our pilot episode, we cover the who, what, and why of our show here. But in a nutshell, 25 years ago, James Dover Grant, going by the pseudonym Lee Child, decided to create one of the most fascinating and enduring fictional characters. A character who is not only a brilliant investigator, but also a gifted fighter and an expert marksman. Jack Nunn Reacher. So just a little bit of personal stuff here. As I said before, I'm Dean. I've been podcasting for a few years now. I run the Podskier Podcast Network, as well as hosting the Podskier Podcast, the How Are You Now podcast, toughest podcast in Letterkenny, Disputed podcast, and I also produce and edit the Boondocks podcast. I love pop culture, and podcasting helps me share the love of these things that bring me joy. So I hope what we're planning on giving you here interests you and makes you smile. Tiara?
I'm Tiara. I co-host both the How Are You Now podcast and the Boondocks podcast. I joke that Dean does most of the work and I'm just the voice talent, but I also tend to have a different perspective on things as an autistic adult. Bottom line is this is going to be an adventure, and we're very lucky to have you along for the wander.
Yes, we are. So, if you're ready, let's get into Reacher, Season 1, Episode 1. Welcome to Margrave.
1 second. Before we start, I would like to remind anybody out there who would like to follow along with the books that episode 1 is chapters 1 through the beginning of chapter 10.
Right. And yeah, there are some changes, and
yes.
TR will note those as we go along. So we start off midnight, Margrave, Georgia. Quiet little town just outside of Atlanta. Over the sounds of night, insects, the sounds of silent shots ring out, leaving 2 bodies hiding near a highway overpass. Later that morning, with the heavy rain coming down, a bus stops at a crossroad, allowing a single passenger to exit. Large man begins to walk down the road that intersected with the highway. Undeterred, the man makes it to the front doors of the Margrave Diner. As he gets there, a scene plays out before him that he finds just a little bit concerning. A man briskly exits the diner, dragging along what appears to be his wife or girlfriend, and berating her for tipping too much. Without saying a word, the traveler stops his progress into the diner and watches the scene take place. The man looks at the traveler initially and tries to act tough. But after reassessing the situation and realizing how imposing this traveler is, he relents and tells the traveler it won't happen again. And then the traveler just heads inside.
In the books, there's a lot of talk about how large and imposing Reacher is. This scene is entirely for the TV show, but it is meant to show how intimidating he is without saying a word. Without making it feel forced or a trope, the show did a really good job with this particular change.
It did. It was perfectly played out, and one of the big selling things right off the bat for me with this show. So anyway, as the traveler begins working on the peach pie that he's ordered and the coffee, he sees 2 police cruisers quickly pull up to the diner. He sizes up the situation and realizes, well, they're coming for me. So he places a $10 bill under his pie plate, puts his hands palm down on the table, and the officers come in, place him under arrest for murder.
Now, in the book, Reacher is eating an entire meal. He's been at the diner for a while, so he sees the cops coming up and he decides to finish his coffee because he knows what's about to happen. The whole pie thing is a trope for the TV show, but it's not as uncharming as it sounds.
Right.
So the other difference in this scene is the size of the police presence. In the book, there are 4 cops that come after Reacher. In the show, they only have 2. This is because, as we'll see in a future scene, the Margrave police force is only 5 people, whereas in the book, there was a larger police force in that town.
Very true. So, restrained at the wrists by zip ties, the traveler is brought inside by the officers who arrested him. He is processed in by a woman in her early 30s, all while the chief, a man in his 50s, grills Jack about, why are you in my town?
Now, in the book, Roscoe, who is the processing officer, is brunette and voluptuous. In the show, she's blonde, petite, very small structure. One of the issues that I've had with several of the Reacher books is the way, the commentary about women's looks. With Roscoe in particular in the book, there was a lot of emphasis on her chest. So having Roscoe not be a typical beautiful woman makes her feel more like a real person in the show instead of a sexy lamp. If you don't know what I mean by a sexy lamp or what the sexy lamp test is, it's a great way to evaluate movies and TV shows for their female representations. Can the character be replaced by a sexy lamp without changing the story, like in Christmas Story? In addition to that change in her presentation, Roscoe has a much bigger part in the beginning of the show than she does in the book. This change also helps make the character and the relationship that will form more realistic. The other part of this scene, when they are grilling him and pulling things like a passport out of his pocket and a World War II medal, those items were completely invented for the TV show. We decided to look up why that change was made because in the beginning, or in the early books, it's constantly mentioned that he doesn't have any personal items, no ID, no nothing. So we decided to go and find out why this change happened, and we realized that Child decided that he would have to start adding a passport in Jack's belongings after 9/11. Before that, you didn't necessarily have to have a passport to leave the country. Whereas after, that was a big change, and Reacher would have to adapt if he was going to be able to do what he does. So all of the books post that time include a passport, so Reacher can easily travel all over the world. And the other thing is the zip ties, 100% for the show.
Very true. Also, the one thing that is a constant for him to be traveling with is his fold-up toothbrush, and
yes.
They did include that.
Yes.
So I was good. I was happy to see
matter.
that. Details definitely matter. Another thing that I will point out about Roscoe here is that right off the bat, she signifies that she is a presence.
Yes.
She says, "Come over here, sir. I'm not asking, I'm telling." And it's just that's her first instance that you see her on the screen, and I think that part of her very much tells who she's going to be going forward.
Right. I love that scene in particular because you've got the cop who's trying to be tough with the shotgun, who's like, move your ass to make him move faster. Mm-hmm. And Reacher just stops and looks at him.
Yeah.
And she realizes this dude is not going to comply by you being an asshole to him. Just be firm and, pleasant, and he will probably do what I want. And that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
She was not mean to him, and therefore he was like, okay, I'll talk to you.
Exactly. And from there, we see this black man come out, the chief detective, to instruct them to take Jack to the conference room for interrogation. In the conference room, the black officer identifies himself as Chief Detective Oscar Finley. Reacher, as you'll hear often, says nothing. That is a common phrase in the book. If you look up merch for Jack Reacher, you will find
Reacher says nothing.
Reacher says nothing on many a t-shirt. So yes, this is a common trope for Jack. He is the very much the strong silent type in every way, shape, and form. Finley lays out the entire scenario for the murder of the body that they found and suggests that Jack lawyer up. Reacher breaks his silence, telling Finley that he does not need a lawyer because he did not murder anyone. In the meantime, the officer who processed Jack, Roscoe, couldn't find any information online at all about Jack. No online profile, no ownership of any property or anything like that.
I like this update from the book because there was no online presence in 1997.
What?
There was no social media. Like the things that you might be able to find might include more like chat rooms that someone frequents, or like I honestly can't even remember other ways that
he would have had it. He could have at the most an AOL account.
Right, a free AOL account, or one that costs $5 a month for 500 hours with the CD-ROM.
Exactly.
Let's see, where was I? So the internet was still in its early days before social media. The change speeds up the story a little, as the amount of time needed to look into all of the things back then was a lot. So in this case, instead of spending hours searching for any information on what he's done, Roscoe immediately knows, well, he doesn't own any property. He's not on social media. He's like the easy things that now we take for granted that you can look up, like normal people can look up, and police. They didn't have that kind of access back then. So it's a good change, a nice update that works really well.
Yeah. So because of Reacher's history, with his military history, Finley makes the argument that he's the ideal person to have done this murder. Reacher agrees, but corrects Finley's idea of who did the murder due to the way things went down. One person obviously was a skilled shooter. Another one who kicked the crap out of the corpse was a psycho. And a third person who was just ready to get out of there is the one who covered up the body. Finley, realizing that Reacher may just be right in this instance, gets a little nervous. Some anxiety takes him over and his knee starts bouncing, and Reacher calls him out on it.
So this is one change where it seems really minor, but it kind of stuck out to me just because of, in the story, it's very obvious in the book that Finley is an ex-smoker, but probably a recent ex-smoker. He pats his pockets on his coat, which anyone who has smoked for any amount of time, you know what that signals. In this case, they made it a lot more subtle with just the water kind of moving a little. And for me, that just made it feel a little more forced. Like they were trying to make it subtle so that people wouldn't notice it. But for me, it was a little too subtle. So, additionally, the phone number that they found in the shoe was handled differently in the book, where Jack is the one who suggests calling the number instead of waiting for a warrant. This leads to an entire chapter about calling the number and bluffing their way through figuring out who it belonged to.
Right. Yeah, and it's a whole thing with Jack right at that point where he's kind of resigned to the fact that he's not going to get anywhere with this because of that. So anyway, Finley, frustrated at this process at this point, throws Reacher back into his holding cell. Reacher goes in, lays down, and reflects back. He has a bit of a flashback memory from back to when he was 12. Landing in a new duty station where his father was a Marine Corps person. I don't remember his rank. But
Captain. I believe he was one. Like Reacher
that sounds about right.
Reached one rank above his dad.
Yeah. So they had moved into a new place, and they're moving in. He's already in trouble because he's caught a box on fire. His mother has just said, get out of here, go find the other kids. He and Joe, his brother, take off. And because he is a trouble magnet, he got into a fight with some new kids in this new place that they're moving into. Waking up from this flashback, he spots Roscoe drinking a cup of coffee over by the coffee machine and gestures to her that he'd also like some. She obliges, providing him with a no-nonsense cup of black coffee. She informs him that his prints haven't turned anything up, and if they had, that would have signaled that he would have been a bad guy. Nothing's turned up yet, but so anyway, Finley comes out at that point and hollers at Roscoe that they got a hit on the phone number that they found in the shoe, and they have to go check it out. So from there, they arrive at the house, Finley and Roscoe, at the house of Paul Hubble, the owner of the phone number that they found in the body. Finley lets Paul know that they're there to talk to him about a murder and how his phone number was found on in the shoe of the victim. Paul is listening, but he looks outside and sees a dark sedan hanging out in front of his house, and his face gets very grave and immediately admits to the crime. Finley is dubious about this confession just because of the way Hubble looks. He's a very wealthy man, does not look like somebody who would be a killer, and presents him with the manner of death that didn't actually happen, and Paul admits to it. Finley then has to place him under arrest.
As I mentioned before, in the book, this process was much different and drawn out much longer. The interrogation takes place at the police station, and there's a whole 40 minutes of recorded silence while Hubble decides what to do before he confesses to murder. There is no mysterious car watching him. Right.
Finley and Roscoe process then Hubble at the police station, put him in a holding cell with Reacher. You can see Hubble's, he sees Reacher and he's got a bit of hesitance about going in there, but it makes him get in there. Finley then tells Jack to come with him. Reacher declines until he says, you got to take these zip ties off. And Finley then asks for the box cutters. Reacher says, that's okay. I've got it. Using his own strength, he just breaks the zip ties. He picks him up and asks him, you guys recycle?
I love this part. While I thought the zip ties themselves were a little hokey, I love this part because it's literally like, yeah, I kept these on the whole time, but I could have broken them at any time. Like, I did that so easy, just to, like I'm showing you right now.
Yeah, you guys think you know who I am, but I'm showing you. This is, I'm allowing you. I'm allowing this.
Yes, exactly.
That's how it felt. So anyway, Finley walks Reacher outside of the police office and breaks down the entirety of what's happened with Hubble and his confession. Reacher is, at this point, here's the confession. He's ready to leave when Finley basically tells him that he knows that it was a bullshit confession, and he also thinks that Reacher isn't telling him everything. Reacher tells him that Officer Stevenson definitely knows something because the way he and Hubble looked at each other for a whole 2 Mississippis. Finley is perturbed at how confident Jack is in his theories. Reacher then explains how confident he is by deducing Finley's history going from Boston to Margrave, and including that he went to Harvard, is divorced or widowed, and is recently a former smoker. Finley takes all this in, gets extremely irked, spins around, and takes Reacher back inside.
So this is an interesting scene because, like Sherlock Holmes, Reacher breaks down everything he's figured out about Finley and refers to him as the Black Sherlock Holmes. Like, it's a very self-aware moment in this TV show where they're like, yes, we know this is very much like this. But the other thing you mentioned about Reacher commenting about about him being divorced. Yeah, we don't know. We don't actually know. He never confirms it.
Right.
He just talks about that he has someone, or he had someone, and her name was Sharon.
Right.
So I think that's important because, again, we, at least not in this episode, we really don't know yet.
Very true. So, when Finley brings Reacher back inside, he also beckons Stevenson into his office and begins asking Stevenson what he knows. And turns out that the night before, Stevenson was at a party with Paul and his wife, Charlie, and were there until he took them home at 2:00 in the morning. So he knows he couldn't have done anything to anyone. So at that point, Finley decides that he's going to use Jack to find out what Hubble knows by sending him to the local jail and waiting there until Monday. Jack, of course, is pissed because he knows he didn't do it. He knows Finley knows he didn't do it. And he's now having to go be a cop. He's for Finley inside. So anyway, they shackle both of them up, put them on a bus, head them off to Warburton jail. That evening, they arrive at Warburton and are greeted by an Officer Spivey. Spivey processes them into the jail. He even goes so far as to attempt a strip search like you see in so many prison films. Reacher, though, is having none of this and threatens Spivey just to check off the box on the clipboard before he seriously injures him. Spivey does so and then takes them both to a cell.
Now, Spivey in the TV show is an amalgamation of multiple characters. In the book, there is a whole elaborate it's the end of the night and the shift is about to change, and the whole scheme that's about to happen takes so much more than what we get in this. In this, we get Spivey, the singular person doing this thing.
Right. And
in the book, he was the assistant warden.
Yeah, that's true.
The name was, anyway.
Right. And there's also no strip search.
Right. The strip search was completely...
Yeah, that was done. And I think that was done, as I said, as you see with so many prison films, bend over and spread them. Mm-hmm. This kind of turns that on its head. So I very much enjoyed that. So the humor in this is for those little pieces that they have to have, I think is great. Mm-hmm. The next morning, their cell opens up automatically. Buzz, boom. Reacher hops down from his bunk, take a look, and he realizes that they're in there with the lifers.
In the book, Jack finds out from an old prisoner who was there cleaning that they're in with the lifers. The two were not given uniforms, and so this prisoner thinks it's hilarious that they were there in their street clothes. And finds out, basically, like, hey, you guys are definitely not where you're supposed to be, and this is going to be fun for me to watch.
Just an old man, just him giggling the entire time.
This is the funniest thing I've ever seen, and
Right.
I've been here since God.
Exactly. So anyway, in this scene this morning, we find out just exactly how brutal of a character Jack Reacher is. 4 black inmates enter their cell, and the main guy immediately starts to try to turn Hubble out. He takes his shoes, he takes his glasses, and just as about he's trying to, go the rest of the way, Reacher hops down and gives the guy a headbutt, 3 elbow strikes, and takes him out in no time flat. He tells the other 3 to haul their unconscious friend away, and that's it.
So I'm not going to dissect all the fights because this show is a lot of fights. This book is a lot of fights over and over and again. They're going to be different because of the times and the constraints of television. But I love one thing that they didn't do that was included in the books. I love how they didn't show Reacher contemplating letting whatever happens to Hubble happen. In the book, he wrestles with the idea, realizing that he would be next if he didn't step in. It makes him seem heartless to me. In the TV show, it's more like he wants to be heartless, but he can't let himself do it.
Right. He's definitely got empathy.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So from there, Reacher and Hubble head to the yard, where Hubble begins telling Reacher how he's in huge trouble because of what he's being forced to do under the threat of the lives of his family and himself. Very bad stuff is he's been told. Reacher is watching around the yard as he sees some white nationalist prisoners starting to eyeball him. He at that point decides, I'm going to go hit the head.
And in the book, there was no prison yard scene. They just go directly from their cells to the washroom.
Right. And so once in the washroom, Reacher grabs a washcloth, wets it, starts running over the back of his neck as he waits for what he knows is about to happen. Just then, 5 white nationalist prisoners enter the room. Reacher warns them that they should leave. They don't, and he beats the crap out of all of them in an extremely brutal fashion. Gouges one guy's eye out, kicks another in the throat, which ends up killing him, and then basically leaves all the rest of them in a pile. At this time, the alarms in the prison start blaring, and the guards come in, grab both Reacher and Hubble, completely confused as to why they're in Gin Pop, and take them back to the arraignment floor and tell them, this is where you've been the whole time.
So the biggest differences in this part of the book, in the book, the Aryans strike first. Reacher does not give them a chance and then jump the count that he's doing.
Right.
After Reacher handles them all, the other major gang in this prison, who are the Red Boys, which is the black gang, are the ones who come in and stop the fight and take credit for the fight. Because, 5 Aryans get beaten up by another white guy isn't as cool for them as if their gang beat up the other gang.
Right.
Spivey is also the one to remove Reacher and Hubble to the proper area of the prison. So in the book, he puts them where they're not supposed to be, and then ends up rescuing them when Reacher kills the ones who were set against him.
Right. Sometimes plans don't work as you like. As all this is happening, Finley is back at his office at his desk, spinning his wedding ring and pondering his next steps. He picks up his cell phone and calls Sharon, his wife. He leaves her a voicemail explaining the issues he's having with the case, and then he just needs to hear her voice, and then he hangs up. After he hangs up, Roscoe comes in the office carrying the entirety of Reacher's service career and covers everything for Finley. She also chastises Finley for putting Reacher in jail. He makes her leave, then closes all his blinds and reaches into his desk drawer for an envelope that says, "Don't do it." Inside, a pack of cigarettes. He doesn't. He tosses them back in.
Now, this change I really like. In the book, he never considers going back to smoking. But as someone who quit smoking years ago, it absolutely is always in the back of your mind when you are stressed out.
Boy, yeah. I mean, I think even watching shows where somebody's stressed out and having a cigarette makes me want to have a cigarette.
Yeah, and it doesn't leave. It doesn't matter how long it's been since you smoked. And it doesn't matter how much you know you don't want to do it. When you get too stressed out, it's because that was a coping mechanism. Yeah. And for most people, probably what caused them to start smoking in the first place. And then the other thing about the scene is talking to Sharon.
Yeah.
This scene really humanizes Finley and gives you empathy for his character. So, like, he's not just this hard-ass detective who's, threw Reacher in jail for no reason. He's actually really struggling with a lot of things and is really stressed out. Yeah. So I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Having been there for only 6 months, he's the only black officer in a tiny little town. So yeah, he's got things that he's stressed about. So this is not surprising. Anyway, Reacher at that point wakes up on the bed of his new cell to music that Hubbell's listening to. Hubbell gives a little bit more insight into his background, to his role of what's been going on, but he's not sure he can completely trust Jack, so he tries not to give too much away as he's doing so.
In the TV show, Reacher encourages Hubbell to stay quiet. In the book, Reacher never encourages Hubbell to stay quiet like he does in the show. In the show, he's basically saying, just don't say a thing, don't say a word, just keep your head down. And that's.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, because in this next scene, it's, Reacher and Hubbell are leaving the prison.
Right.
And that's because, Finley's found out that they got the tape. Roscoe got the tape of Reacher getting onto the bus in Tampa at midnight, the night that everything was supposed to have happened. So it's obvious that he couldn't have been the one doing it. She also notices his injuries and explains what's happened, and he explains what's happened inside and that he doesn't intend to stay around to be involved in any more of this mess. So she, because of all the inconvenience, to put it lightly, that he's had to go through, she offers to take him to dinner, but he needs to get some new clothes. So they go to the Salvation Army. So he gets him some new shirt and jeans, and then they drive back into town where she drops him off so that he can go check out the rest of the town while she finishes up work. And then he's going to meet her later for dinner. So as he walks around the town, he's noticing how immaculate everything is. I mean, there's a freshly painted gazebo. There is no
polished
dust on anything. Yeah. And so he's just picking up on all these things. And one thing he also notices as he's walking around is this big black Ram pickup truck. He keeps an eye on it, and he keeps, as he's walking through town, and he comes across this barbershop that has blues music coming out of it. Now, Jack is big blues music fan. And as he's already said, since he's been here, the reason he's come here is because of the blues guitarist Blind Blake. So he's come in to see what's what. The barber, Mosley, is just about to have lunch, but allows Jack come in for a shave. And the other thing that we do know about barbershops, if anything, is that it's the place for town gossip, especially in a small town. And Mosley has it in abundance. He talks about the blues, Blind Blake, his sister singing with Blind Blake, as well as the family who runs the town, the Kleiners. And as they're talking, the big black Ram truck parks just on the other side of the street from the barbershop. Two guys get out of it. Mosley spots him, tells Reacher that the kid driving the truck is Kleiner Jr., also known as KJ, and the other one is his cousin, Dawson. Reacher goes out to talk to him. KJ is a very smarmy and privileged 20-something and says that he's just recently read something about charges that were brought against a Major Jack Reacher. Charges about something that happened in a village just outside of Baghdad, and that those charges somehow just disappeared. KJ tells him that they don't put up with that kind of stuff there and that he should watch his back. And then he gets in his truck and leaves. Reacher is left just a little bit bemused.
Now, Mrs. Kleiner is never shown or even mentioned in the TV show, but she's definitely a part of the book. The charges KJ brings up against him aren't in the book either, although we suspect that it will come up later. For clarity's sake, we've only read the first 5 books in the series so far. There are 25 books as of today, and so it may take a little while for us to catch up.
Just a bit.
Now, the other thing in this that is different from the books, and it's a slight change, but it's kind of enough to throw the rhythm off for me. In the book, there are 2 barbers, one old black man and then an older black man. So a lot of the conversation between Mosley and Reacher in this scene was broken up between 3 people in the book. And to me, that flowed a lot better because the 2 men were able to kind of play off each other with things that they knew that Reacher didn't know. And you didn't have that in the TV show. But otherwise, the scene was pretty solid on the information that was conveyed.
Right. Anyway, Reacher from the barbershop heads back to the police station, only to see Baker and Stevenson running to their cruisers and taking off in a hurry. Roscoe informs Reacher that another body was found, and that Reacher at that point decides, well, it looks like dinner's canceled, so I'm going to make my time to leave. Just then, Finley comes out to ask Reacher what Hubble told him while they were in jail. Reacher tells him that Hubble said nothing to him. Finley, of course, doesn't believe him and threatens Reacher with another 2 to 3 weeks in Warburton unless he goes with him to the morgue right now. Reacher reluctantly complies. So they get in the car, they head off to the morgue. The medical examiner is explaining exactly how they found the second body and the difference between it and the first body. He's listing the oddities also with the first body. Jack's ears start to perk up. He's very familiar with every bit of this information because he realizes it's his brother Joe.
Now, in the book, the medical examiner receives a fax while they are standing there, and Reacher sees it. It's got Joe's name on it. In the book, his face was gone. He was shot in the face, not nice and neat in his forehead like in the TV show. He was not ID'd by a scar. It was the fingerprints in the book. I like the way the TV story changed that because it feels a lot more authentic as to what would happen. Not that at the time, again, this book was written in 1997. At the time, fax machines were still a thing. But I feel like it was a little more, hey, that's my brother when in the show.
Yeah.
Because describing all of the injuries and talking about the cellulite, or was it dermatitis or cellulitis on the fingertips, and like all of these things made him realize it was his brother. Whereas in the book, the dental work. And so, whereas in the book, it was just, oh, there's his name. Shit, that's my brother.
Yeah. Instead
of having to come to the conclusion, he's just given it.
Right. So yeah, he hears all these things. And then he gets to the point even where they pull him out of the drawer and he sees the scar that he got when they were kids,
right,
that he gave to him. So yeah, and from there, Reacher is he's crestfallen. He bolts out of the front of the office to the parking lot and is trailed immediately by Finley and Roscoe. Finley, at this point, begins peppering Jack with questions, understandably. Jack, however, is grieving, and he's not having any of this. He fires back at Finley about his wife leaving him because he's pressing buttons on Jack that he doesn't like, and so Jack's pressing back. Roscoe finally has to break them up. She makes Reacher get into the car. She tells him that he wouldn't beat up on somebody smaller than him because he's got kind eyes, and that gives him a little bit of pause. And finally, he relents and gets in the car. Yeah,
the "you've got kind eyes" really throws Reacher off.
And I could see that. I would think that would probably do that to me as well. So
well, it's kind of honestly a kind of a strategy that I used as a teacher. when I would have a student who was really angry, you distract them with something that's so completely like different from what's happening that it snaps them out of that mood. It doesn't always work. It usually doesn't, actually. But in this, it was perfect because he was so it's obvious that Reacher is already attracted to her. The
Right.
way that he immediately said yes when she was like, "Oh, I was going to take you to dinner." Like he was like, "Oh crap, that gives me an excuse. Cool, yes, let's do this."
Well, and not only that, I mean, and the very first time when they meet each other, she disarms him about, "Come over here, sir. I'm not asking, I'm telling."
Exactly.
And so that kind of establishes that relationship right off the bat, and it continues in that same vein. And so from there they head off down the road together. Reacher is deep in thought, and obviously still grieving, saying that maybe his brother Joe who is the one who told him about Blind Blake for a reason, so that maybe he would come there to help do something about it. And then finally, Finley asks, "Well, what would you do?"
I guess I'll find everybody responsible. I kill every last one of them.
And that's how this episode ends. So, yeah, that's great. I mean, great first episode.
For a first episode, there's so much packed into it. I was really surprised. Like, just the fact that it was 10 chapters of the book that went into this episode. There's so much information that was shoved into it, but not in any way does it feel rushed or pushed along or anything feels overlooked. Like it happens a lot when stories are moved along that fast.
Right. And it's the way they handled everything. I mean, the things that they changed for time, the things that they changed to update, I think all helped in that aspect. Mm-hmm. So I think it was great how they did that, how they were able to keep everything the way that they did with the entire story still being essentially, I would say, would you probably say 95% is still spot on?
I would say 90, but only because the changes that they made, it's obvious that they wanted there to be a few surprises for people who liked the books.
Yeah.
Like there were a few things that were changed because of, it's been 25 years.
Yeah.
But things like adding in, what's Hubble's wife's name? Charlie. Adding in Charlie, like she doesn't show up in she doesn't have any real presence in the book, I should say.
True. But
in the TV show, like they picked a face that we actually recognize, one of the few faces we would recognize on that show. So that character was written for it, and it actually provides so much more to it than in the book. Like it makes Hubble feel like he has a family instead of just saying that he does.
True.
So yeah, things like that where absolutely not in the book, but fits so well. As a book lover and someone who constantly rails against changes that are made, I was really happy with the changes that were made in this one.
Yeah, and I think if you look at Hubble, Paul, he's even more of a sympathetic character.
Mm-hmm. Hubble in the book is not.
He's
you don't
very
really
much
care
more
too much
yuppie.
about him. Yeah. I mean, he's yuppie in a
pretentious,
good old boy
way.
Yeah, but pretentious good old boy.
Yeah.
And in the TV show, he's more kind of hapless nerd.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had some thoughts that I wanted to bring up to you using your neurodivergent goggles.
I figured.
And you're not the only one that I've asked. I've reached out to our friend Awesome as well. But I just kind of want your take as to the way Reacher deduces and the way he focuses and his manners and mannerisms. How do you see him in a potentially neurodivergent light? Okay,
so I'm going to start off by saying I am not an expert in any way. I have studied autism for a lot longer than I knew I was autistic. It was my special interest before I actually understood why it was so fascinating to me. And there are there is a huge difference between what most people think of when they think of someone with autism and what an average person with autism I don't even want to say with autism, an average autistic person out there. Like the whole deductive skill thing, like that's great. There are no details that are missed. Now, I'm not that kind of brain. My brain is the ADHD autistic type, so I don't remember details a lot. I don't see the minutia. I'm a lot more with see the forest, not just the tree.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm actually trying to be more detail oriented in this and like really figuring out what they did different and why they might have done that. But anyway, back to Reacher. I think that the way that he notices everything and remembers things and puts it together is very, very much not a neurotypical thing. I'm not going to say autistic, because there's a huge amount of space under the neurodivergent umbrella these days, despite some gatekeepers trying to change that. But like one of the things that I thought was really interesting just about Reacher in general was he really thrived on the routine of being in the military. And when that routine was taken away from him, he had absolutely no idea what to do. And becoming a wanderer and just moving from place to place, while it seems like it would be antithetical to what an autistic person would need in terms of routine, autistic burnout can sometimes just throw you to the complete opposite wall and make the things that used to give you comfort hurtful and hard to do. So the idea that he's, because in the books, he complains about essentially being... what's the word? He was, he retired not out his first choice. It was not his idea. It was cutbacks in the military. So his routine was completely changed. And all of a sudden he has to fend for himself and do for himself. But he's never cared about the things that one would need to have that kind of life. So he's just like, well, I'm going to figure out what I like and I'm going to go and explore it and I'm going to learn about it. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, if I had money, if I had like, a pension from being in the military for 25 years or what was it?
Yeah. Well, 13 years.
13 years. Right. I'm sorry. I was thinking of, So he's got a pension. He's got money. Why not travel and see everything and learn new things and explore things? Like some of us keep going to different colleges for 50 years and some of us are out in the world learning it that way. So while it's not necessarily a stereotypical representation of an autistic person, someone who is autistic can see that in it for sure.
Yeah. And that's why, because it does seem, and I think that, when we see characters like Reacher or, anybody who's really good at what they do and they seem so singularly focused, it does make me ask that question.
Right.
And I know that he may not have been written in that way. I mean, I know that
it rarely do you have a character who is written autistic, who is written authentically.
Right. And the thing, and the story, I mean, Lee Child, who wrote this, basically he was at a change in his life as well at this time. He had been working for ITV. He's a Brit. He was working for ITV and he'd been there for some time and he got laid off. Now he had, been working on stories already, but this was a point in time where he decided, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and start writing that book that I always wanted to write. and this is kind of in a way analogous to his own story. He is Lee Child is also 6'5", and
not built so imposingly though.
No, but it's still, and he got the name Reacher because of his wife. She, because he's tall, and she would have him go grab things, and she says
I didn't know that one.
if being an author doesn't work it out, you can always be a reacher. So, and that's
okay, that's adorable.
Yeah,
that's the kind of shit you and I would do.
So it was. So yeah, his story is great, and Lee Child so far. I mean, in both movies, and at the very end of this, and not a huge spoiler, but because it's been in the news, he's had cameos in all of them. So he's kind of like a new Stephen King, I guess, in that aspect.
Yeah, it'll be like one of those Where's Waldo's in every season where you try and figure out where he's going to pop up.
Right, and yeah, the other thing is, I saw another article just recently. Where Lee Child, in very much the same vein as Stephen King, says, I just never believed in writer's block. So, and that's why there are 25, 26 novels out now, or whatever it is. So yeah, it's he's found his passion. He's found the person he's wanted to write for. Now at this point in time in his life, Lee has retired and has now turned over the writing to his younger brother, Andrew. So.
And this is something that came up, I think, in our pilot, but might have just been in conversation that we had. I'm really curious to, once I get through all of the books, I'm really curious to see what changes when the authors change. Because we know that Lee Child does not like the character. And in fact, he goes so far as to say that he hates Jack Reacher. And he wouldn't be able to write Jack into the situations that he did if he didn't hate him.
Right.
So, I wonder if was it his son or his brother?
His brother is taking over, yeah.
So, if his brother will have that same reaction to it, or is it something where his brother loves the character so much and that's why he's taking over the character? Will that change anything about the tone of the stories?
It's a good question. I'm also anxious to read that. Yeah. The other thing I'm very interested in as we go through this, and hopefully the show will continue on for as many books as there are. I don't know if it will.
That would be amazing.
I think what would be awesome also is, there are 2 Tom Cruise movies out there that were based off of 2 of the books.
Yes. Movie number 1 was One Shot, which is book number 9.
Right.
And movie number 2, Never Go Back, was book 18.
Right. So at least, if we get up to 9 seasons, well, if they do it in that order, I don't know. Because now
in the books, he ages appropriately. He grows with the books, and these stories build on each other. So, leaving out those stories might screw up future stories.
Could be, but I do know chronologically in Reacher timeline, the books are not in order. Some of them are
right. Some of them is telling backstory,
right? Because in fact, I think I want to say book 9 or 8.
Well, it's not 9. Okay, 9 is One Shot.
Well, maybe it's 8. So one of the ones that's upcoming here soon. Happens before this. It's
yes.
So there are a few of those that are pre Killing Floor, which is this book. So. Yeah.
So there are a couple of things in canon lore that I found really interesting on how they translated that from book to TV show, because in canon, Reacher is 61 years old. Obviously, he's not 61 years old. This book is starting at the same place that the first book starts, when Reacher is 37.
Right.
And
he's 6 months out of the service.
He's 6 months out of the service, and it's moving on from there. But like we said, there are 25 books out there right now. So Reacher has aged.
Yeah.
At the point of time when One Shot and Never Go Back were made, Cruise was actually probably more realistic in the age range.
True.
So that to me, because we know that he was a big fan of the books.
Yeah.
To me, he was like, we need to pick one where I'm an appropriate age. He couldn't do book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because it's all about the first couple of years after the military.
Yeah.
He had to do ones that were later on.
That makes sense. And by the way, we are not denigrating Tom Cruise's version of Reacher
not
at all. I mean,
they were actually probably some of my favorite Tom Cruise movies.
They weren't bad at all. I mean, Tom Cruise, as I like to say, Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise.
Yes.
And no matter pretty much any movie that you see him in, he's Tom Cruise, except for maybe Far and Away, which
Right.
is in which case he's kind of sort of Irish Tom Cruise.
Yes.
But in any case, those movies were great. I enjoyed them. Now, my buddy Don from Podskier would disagree, but that's neither here nor there. I think that I've enjoyed those movies a number of times. I've probably watched each of them 3 or 4 times, and would watch them again. Now, what I'm very interested to see is if they get up to that point to see how, if number one, will there be a difference between the two, and what differences will there be? I would imagine there's got to be some differences. So the other thing I'm looking forward to is right now is season 2, since we've watched this a few times now, but
Yes.
Looking forward to season 2. And with what's gone on here in the States, I think book 2 is going to be very interesting to see if they do bring that, because of the story.
There are so many things in book
prescient.
2 that 25 years later we might look at it and go, well, we did, you and I.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, that's going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So yeah, it's not a perfect book series in any way, but I think that updating it is giving it a lot closer to
True.
a really good product.
yeah, especially, and I will say, big props to the showrunner. I want to say Nick Santoro. I want to say, I could be wrong on that name, and I'll have to look it up again, and I apologize. The guy who's running the show now, the way that they have updated, especially Roscoe, has been great.
Nick Santora.
Nick Santoro. Okay, I knew it was so close, but and Finley is even slightly different. He's
More aggressive.
Yeah, he's more aggressive, more confident. I think.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yes.
Not so relaxed. He's got a bit of an edge to him, and it's not bad. Malcolm Goodwin plays the job great. I loved him in
So
iZombie
good. Oh my God.
as the detective there.
Yeah, that's the other face that we recognized was Finley.
Yeah. So great show. And so if you're watching along with it, with us, I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are. And I'm interested in hearing everybody else's takes, from what we think. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring?
No, I'm just really excited to be doing this podcast / kind of book club with all of you. And I hope that this is something y'all are into, and join us on our social medias and stuff, because I really want to hear other people's opinions about the things that we're talking about and what you like and don't like about the show or the books or the movies. We want it all. We want to get in there with you, and let's talk. Let's do it.
We want to talk. Yeah, we definitely want to talk about it. And anything that you bring up to us that you're comfortable with us bringing up on the show, we will.
Yeah.
So, let us know. We want to hear from you. So, all right, travelers, it's time to pack up and get ready for our next episode of Reacher, Season 1, Episode 2, First Dance.
I don't need 250 pounds of frontier justice tearing up this town.
I can't talk right now. There's been another murder. Police Chief Morrison.
For the record, I didn't do it.
All right, folks, we really appreciate that you've chosen to spend your time with us and follow us around our favorite wanderer, Jack Reacher. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can hit us up on Twitter at twitter.com/wanderingtype or on Instagram at instagram.com/wanderingtypepod. You can also find us, along with the rest of the other Podskier Podcast Network shows, on www.podskier.com. We'll see you next time. Take care.